Good evening and welcome. I'm Denise Balla, Program Director for the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to silence your electronic devices, although we do encourage you to engage with us on our social media platforms, so feel free to tweet during tonight's event with our Twitter handle @WACPhila, and please like the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia on Facebook. As this is the last meeting of the season before the summer break, we thank you for your continued support for our speaker events, education programs, and our international travel program. With the support of our members, partners, and the like, the Council is able to offer its most important programs to a diverse group of over 2,100 middle and high school students in 80 schools throughout the Philadelphia area. And these programs foster the skills and sensibilities they will need in order to thrive and compete in a knowledge-based global community. I'd also like to extend our thanks to the World Affairs Councils of America, Shell, and the Rational Middle for selecting the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia to host tonight's event. So to set the stage for our discussion, let's take a look at a short Rational Middle introductory video.
Energy is the basis for everything. It's the basis for our lives. We can't survive without energy.
What is this thing we talk about, energy? And why does it matter so much? It matters because it defines who we are. It matters because it defines where we work, how we get there, what we invent.
In fact, how we use energy and how much energy we use is the defining element of modern civilization.
U.S. energy use has been heading upward inexorably since the country's founding, and it's always been a challenge to find the right way to supply that energy.
The problem is that people don't know anything about where energy comes from.
We believe electricity is invisible. That means I flick my switch, and I don't believe in my mind that there's a fuel behind that.
We've been faced with challenges that should have forced us to make changes in the way we deal with energy for decades. But we still have big problems. We're vulnerable to oil prices around the world, and we continue to pump enormous amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
It's really about the profound impacts that we are having now. 7 billion people, the doubling of the need of energy on this planet over the course of the next few decades, with more people living more prosperous lives, trying to do more things. The pressure is on.
We need to change the way we power our economy in a way that's sustainable for 200 years, not just for the next 20.
There is a disconnect between our value about using energy and our unwillingness to change our own personal behavior.
We've got to get on with it. We've got to break the gridlock over this and move forward with the choices, trade-offs, technologies that are required.
We need to start working on this issue now.
In the end, it has to come down to having a rational plan for our use.
Let's be reasonable. Let's find a compromise. Let's find a way out of this.
The question is whether that will be our priority or not. And that's the challenge.
And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Gregory Kallenberg is the director and producer of the Rational Middle Energy Series. He puts the energy into the energy series.
Nice, good one.
He deeply believes that people can come together to find balanced and rational solutions to some of the world's most pressing challenges, including utilizing viable sources of energy for the future. Adam Agalico is the energy manager for the city of Philadelphia, the 5th largest city in the United States. In his role, he manages a team of individuals responsible for developing and implementing energy conservation and energy efficiency projects within municipal facilities and leads the strategic procurement of city government's energy supply. Patrick Gurion is an associate professor of environmental engineering at Drexel University. Can you turn the sound up a little bit? His research goal is to improve environmental policies through the development of better decision-making tools. In his research, he tries to provide an integrated view of the issue as integrated a view of the issue as possible, and to treat important uncertainties in a quantitative fashion. Mike Stark is the managing director of Green Mountain Energy, whose responsibilities serving the Green Mountain Energy business include growing the brand as a market leader and managing sales and financial objectives in the Northeast retail region. So please join me in welcoming Greg, Patrick, Adam, and Mike. And Greg will begin and tell you a little bit about what he's doing with the Rational Middle.
Sure, and thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. You know, I got to tell you that it's, hang on, there we go. I'm gonna go Lady Gaga on you now. But I was going to tell you that you know it's interesting to be in a city that really is as important as Philadelphia is, and I'm not quite sure I understood it. And I was in the rental car bus from the airport terminal to Hertz, and they said quite simply, "Welcome to Philadelphia, the city that started America." And I thought, you know, just drop the mic and just leave the stage at that point. So I want to tell you that it's sort of interesting, me being here. Bill Clifford invited me to come speak at your national conference in Washington, D.C. And, you know, I didn't know a lot about the World Affairs Council going into that. I'd done one World Affairs Council event. And it was this amazing sort of coming together of minds. It was almost like I was Aquaman, and finally I found my League of Friends. And in that, it really was this group of people with similar thinking, trying to get to a rational solution, willing to talk things out. And that's really what the Rational Middle is all about. I mean, it all started when I did a film called Haynesville. And in marching Haynesville around the country, seeing the pros and the antis not really speaking to each other, you know, our film was able to bring people to a place where they could have that discussion about energy. And when we developed the Rational Middle, which is this series of short films, it's online at rationalmiddle.com. It can be utilized by anybody and everyone out there to see that this is also bringing people together in an amazing way. To date, the series has been seen over 3.2 million times. Our retention rate is one of the highest in at least our sector on YouTube. And it's being utilized in the community meeting, the board meeting, and the policy meeting. And that's important because people can't argue about things, by my estimation, unless they have the facts about something. And what the Rational Middle is supposed to do is bring experts from all sides of an issue to a place where they can have a rational discussion and work on civil solutions-based issues. And that's hopefully what we're going to do tonight. I'm thrilled about the panel that we have here. This is a great example of what the Rational Middle is all about. I mean, it's, you know, from the films to real time. I'm ecstatic, and I can't wait to engage with these guys, and I'll turn it over to...
Great. My name is Adam McAllico. I'm the energy manager for the city of Philadelphia, and I'll just give you guys a little bit of background of kind of what I do on my daily kind of work day, as well as some of the work that the city's doing. Most of my work is focused on internal city buildings, city operations. However, I'm also involved with the kind of the outward-facing work. So, you know, the city, first and foremost, I believe, has to take care of its own facilities, and whether that be through strategic procurement, making sure we're getting affordable energy for our facilities and that we're not charging taxpayers too much for those, but also that we're using that responsibly and that energy is being used efficiently and our buildings are becoming you know, greener and more sustainable as we are we need to lead by example, and if we're going to ask folks to also kind of come along for the ride and invest in their facilities and look at energy efficiency as a solution. So in my role, again, I focus internal operations. So that's everything from really boring stuff like bill auditing and making sure that the utility bills that we're paying are appropriate. We're not paying for some building that's not associated with city government. You'd be surprised how many people try to sneak things on our bill. To things that are a lot more exciting, like energy efficiency projects and combined heat and power projects, where we're looking at transforming the way that we use and we generate energy in the city of Philadelphia. So for example, a lot of folks don't know this, we invested a large amount of money in our downtown facilities, and those investments will save about $1.4 million in utility costs over the next, annually, over the next 15 years. It's through a performance-based model, a really unique type of thing, but really exciting opportunity to do big things and projects that really make a lot of sense for the city and for the taxpayers. The highlight of that project, and again, a lot of folks probably missed this through the news cycle, if you look at the clock tower at City Hall, it's now lit by LED lighting, as opposed to previously it was an older T12, really inefficient. That project alone is $10,000 annually for the city. So I get to do really fun stuff like that. And then on the other side of kind of the boring aspect is energy purchasing. And again, making sure that when you buy electricity in the quantities and natural gas and vehicle fuel in the quantities that the city uses it, you don't just kind of set up and pay your regular bill. You've got to do it in a very strategic fashion. So we're careful to make sure that we're giving taxpayers the best possible deal with our purchasing. So I've been in the energy management game for about 5 years with the city in various aspects. Before that, I worked for a renewable energy company and developed wind energy projects. So I'm really familiar with renewable energy and kind of what it takes to kind of bring those projects to light. Those really ultimately made me really interested in energy efficiency, but I still am very interested in renewable energy. And I'm excited to be here and share a little bit of my experience and some of the things I've learned and some of the things that maybe the city's doing that you're not aware of. Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, thank you. My name's Mike Stark. I'm the managing director at Green Mountain Energy. First off, I'll tell you that energy purchasing is not that boring. I do actually find it interesting. And what Green Mountain is one of the first retail energy suppliers that provides 100% renewable energy to its customers. We were actually founded in 1997, so we're obviously been around the block and been here for a long time. And what we provide customers essentially is in markets such as Pennsylvania, such as here in Pico, you have the choice of where your retail energy supply comes from, and Green Mountain Energy is a choice that many customers make to be able to choose 100% renewable energy. So what we typically focus on is providing that choice to customers and really providing customers the ability to power their home or their businesses in some cases, in many cases actually, with wind or solar power through the purchasing of REC. So we are and have been a supplier that has always provided 100% renewable energy. And our goal here in the East is obviously to grow, as Denise mentioned, grow our brand and make people understand that you do have a choice with who your energy provider is, particularly in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, et cetera. So really Green Mountain's mission at the end of the day is to change the way that power is made. And the way that we do that is we get more and more people to sign up for 100% renewable power, which obviously means that you need to fund projects that require renewable energy. So, for about 18 years now, that's been our mission. That continues to be our mission. And we are, an active participant in the local community in terms of driving that forward. From an East perspective, we're based here in Philadelphia. We're actually based up on Market Street. And one of our key primary objectives, in addition, is kind of giving back from a community perspective. So as an example, we have a program called Sun Club, where, for instance, we just made a donation to the Philadelphia Zoo on behalf of our customers, where all of their golf carts that they use to move people around in the zoo, for those of you that go to the zoo, will be solar powered. And we're going to start, they're actually going to start rolling out hopefully here in the next couple of months. But those are the types of changes that we're looking to drive as a retail supplier. There are a lot of retail suppliers in the market. A lot of them are looking to make changes, such as what's being talked about from a renewable perspective. And Green Mountain's mission is to be at the forefront of that. I'm excited to be here.
Could the speakers
Sure.
Okay, so this is Patrick Gurian, and I'm faculty in environmental engineering at Drexel University. And I have to apologize, I'm evidently the only speaker here who brought PowerPoint. So just to think about this, when I got the invitation, I was like, well, gee, do I actually put myself up there as an expert? This is such a broad field that I sort of thought, well, nobody's going to know it all. So why don't I just, in the name of full disclosure, kind of say what I know and what I don't know. So, you know, where I've done actual research and published papers is something where I'm more of an expert. Other areas will be maybe more tangential, and I'll do the best I can to answer questions, but won't be as direct a resource. So one thing that I've looked at is looking at the flowback water, which comes after you frack a well for shale gas, and it flows back to the surface. And we actually have the first author of that paper here in the back. Nora, if you could raise your hand. So any detailed questions about Marcellus Shale flowback water would go to Nora, but suffice it to say that you wouldn't want to drink the stuff. But if it is managed appropriately and treated appropriately, it might not pose a risk to the environment. Second paper is also on Marcellus Shale issues, where we again looked at flowback and whether there would be much transfer from the water to the air such that it might be an issue for workers, and we didn't really see that as a concern. Then the third one is where I get maybe a little bit of breath, and this is actually work that we're doing for Adam's shop, so it's a real pleasure. It's on looking at how Philadelphia might make deep reductions in their greenhouse gas emissions. So that's maybe what gives me a little bit more of a big picture, is having gone through that and said, okay, if we wanted to get serious about greenhouse gas emissions reductions, what would be the technologies we would use, and what would they cost? So at the start of any debate like this, you know, I thought one of the problems that we've really had in this field is the presence of zombies. So what do I mean by a zombie? A zombie is an idea that is dead. Technically, it's been refuted. No scientists take it seriously, but yet it lives on. It comes back from the dead and it eats people's brains. And by eating people's brains, I mean, of course, confusing people, distracting them, being put forth as a valid argument when really it no longer is. So I had a few zombie nominees that I wanted to just mention at the start. And the first, at one point we were hearing a lot, we know the climate is changing, but we don't know why. And in some sense, I think that reverses the technical understanding of the uncertainty in the climate system. We actually have a pretty good idea of the forcing exhibited by greenhouse gases on the climate system. As far as aerosols, much more uncertainty on that. Where the true uncertainty lies, though, is not what we're doing, not how much we're pushing, if you will, the climate system, but how the climate system is going to respond. So we know the basic physics of greenhouse gases. What we don't know is how this immensely complex system, the Earth's climate, will respond to that. So yes, there's uncertainty, but there's not a whole lot of uncertainty about the fact that we're giving the climate system a push, a shove, in the direction of being warmer. Sometimes second zombie nominee, you know, we cannot deny developing countries the right to do what we have done, and also we don't want to shiver in the dark. As far as I know, that's really not on the agenda. So I would call that a straw person fallacy. And then sometimes you'll hear, you know, we need to develop all sources of energy and let the markets decide. And if there's one thing that we know about infrastructure, is that infrastructure is path dependent. You make one decision and it limits your choices in the future. So this is a time for really thoughtful deliberation about what kind of energy infrastructure we want to have. So just in, you know, reviewing the Rational Middle series, what I thought was really nice was it maybe implicitly kind of acknowledges the zombies and brushes them aside, and then moves on to the real issue. So I was really glad to see that it doesn't get tripped up too much in the zombies. Again, very glad to be here tonight, and thank you all for coming.
So now we're going to show 2 additional clips from the Rational Middle series, and then we'll have a conversation.
America was founded based on an abundance of land, an abundance of space, an abundance of opportunity, an abundance of social mobility, and, when it came time, an abundance of energy.
Energy is an essential input into our quality of life. It's an essential input into our economy. How do we meet those growing energy demands while at the same time meeting some other key challenges? The environmental challenge, addressing the security issues that surround energy.
The problem here in the United States is that people don't know where energy comes from. We want to flip on our light switches, we want to turn the ignition in our automobiles, and we want to use energy without understanding the consequences.
We import a huge amount of our oil from other nations, and that relates to energy security because we don't have control over that oil.
There have only been these very few times of national emergency, that we've ever thought about our energy supply. So what are those times? 1973 oil crisis, we had to get in line.
The gas wasn't there. There were even days and odd days when you could go. There were long lines. America truly was held hostage. The economy was brought to its knees.
Another example more recent is what happened in, say, 2007 and 2008 when the price of oil went from about $70 up to about $148.
We're not on a path where we choose our own destiny in petroleum, and in fact, many of the regimes and countries that control that petroleum are not friendly to this nation. The only choice we can make is to move ourselves away from oil.
All energy sources have costs associated with them. Those costs come in different forms. There's the costs that come with dollar signs attached to them. You know, how much we pay for gasoline at the pump, how much we pay for our electricity. There's the costs that don't have dollar signs attached to them. Those tend to be environmental costs.
It's virtually incontrovertible that the climate is warming. The evidence is so profound and so comprehensive that that really is not a discussion.
The big question that people still debate is how much warmer and what will the consequences be for people. We know a lot more than we did even a decade or two ago, but there's always going to be uncertainty remaining.
We put stuff into the atmosphere, whether it's the traditional pollutants or carbon dioxide, without recognizing that on some level, some generation in the future is going to have to pay for that, if not our generation.
At least currently in the United States, we don't have a comprehensive climate policy. So while there is a cost to emitting carbon dioxide emissions and a cost to emitting greenhouse gas emissions in the form of increased risk of global climate change, we don't face that economic cost directly.
I don't believe that we will, have one apocalyptic day. I think we will gradually erode our quality of life and the security of our economic well-being until something happens that really shocks the system. Then I think we will act. But the question is that how deep is the hole we've dug before we have to climb back out of it?
It's really about the profound impacts that we are having now. 7 billion people, the doubling of the need of energy on this planet over the course of the next few decades, the doubling of the need that we're going to have to produce food to feed a growing population. This is not just about some kind of blind, feel-good sort of thing. This is about where we're going globally, with more people living more prosperous lives, trying to do more things. The pressure is on, and we have to produce more with less consequence, not just because of climate change, but because of planet change.
There's a responsibility there in terms of making sure that whatever it is that you're doing to produce energy, whether it's drilling oil and gas wells, mining coal, using wind power, using solar, whatever it is that you're doing has an environmental consequence. And the goal ought to be to minimize the environmental impact.
But at the end of the day, a lot of this is really on my shoulders and your shoulders, because we are ultimately the consumers of the energy. But for some reason, we don't understand that. We grow accustomed to having relatively readily available supply. And when you think about all that, you become aware of why we feel the way we feel about energy. It's always been there.
We have this, great possibility of having, cheaper electricity and the ability to sustain our economy and our economic growth with resources that are produced right here in the United States.
If we could address the environmental challenges while simultaneously doing so in a way that people think is economically affordable, is politically feasible, and also addresses energy security concerns, that's where the solutions lie.
If we put our mind to it, the whole energy infrastructure that we have today could be completely changed into a low-carbon energy future just through technology.
We are now starting to see some of these technologies mature on a commercial level. And investors are comfortable enough now with these technologies that investment in renewables has surpassed fossil fuels for the first time in 2011.
At the moment, those energies like wind and solar are more expensive than hydrocarbons. And we will develop technology as we go along, which will make these sources of energy more efficient and cheaper.
We need to take a very measured approach. We need to understand that winding down our dependence on fossil fuel is not something that's going to happen overnight, but is going to take place over decades.
These are true 21st century globalized issues, problems, challenges that we now confront that require 21st century globalized solutions.
The question is whether that will be our priority or not, and that's the challenge.
Greg, would you like to comment on any of that before we?
All right.
Well, you know, one thing I do want to say is that pay very close attention to the people who are the experts in these films, because when you look at their lower thirds and you look at where they come from, a lot of people would make that assumption looking at just the list of names and their institutions that they wouldn't necessarily agree on a lot of things, that they'd almost be polar opposites in a lot of ways. But what we're trying to do here with the rational middle is really show that overlap. And it's in the overlap where we're seeing this tremendous response, and we're seeing this very deep and earnest discussion take place. And we're also seeing the progress that's going to take us to that energy future. So, and I think we're showing the great transition next. So this is sort of the companion piece, and then we'll jump into a real-time discussion. Thank you.
Our energy crossroads brings together energy security, national security, economic security, and environmental security.
We need to change the way our economy is designed, the way we move around the country, the way we power our economy in a way that's sustainable for 200 years, not just for the next 20.
We've got to get on with it. We've got to break the gridlock over this and move forward with the choices, trade-offs, technologies that are required. A clean energy future is a remarkable thing to think about, and it exists. It means doing less of the really dirty stuff and doing that first. It means doing more of the clean stuff, and that's using more natural gas in place of coal for now. It means using more renewable energies over time.
Renewables have a huge potential, but we have to be realistic. I have to think about how am I going to transition to that at a massive scale.
When you get into the discussions about wind and solar and things like that, you're talking about, you know, on the order of 1.5% to 2% of the total energy mix, which leaves you sitting there scratching your head thinking, wow, we've got a lot of room to really sort of increase that renewable footprint.
The issue with renewables, the reason they're really unable to take the place in our power generation of these other sources is they're transient. They only generate power when the sun's shining or the wind blows, etc.
The intermittency issue is enormous for renewable energy technologies. So while renewables are theoretically limitless, they are not there all the time. So you have to have backup, or you have to have ways of managing the intermittency of wind or solar.
So sort of the holy grail in the electricity market would be, you know, commercial scale battery technology. If you had that, then all these issues about intermittency go away.
Well, one thing you could do is put fast-acting natural gas backups online, whereas the wind dies down or the solar dies down, you ramp up your natural gas in response. So natural gas is really a great partner for renewables because the variability of renewables matches well with the fast response time of natural gas.
For moderate emission reductions, natural gas can play a very important role. So you can get 50% reductions in your emissions relative to coal through natural gas. So right away, if you think of a transition where you have targets that are 50% or so, you can do that through natural gas.
but still is producing greenhouse gases, still is contributing to the warming of the earth. And if we are going to make an eventual pivot away from these sources of energy so that we really address global warming, we're going to have to move past natural gas too.
So that gives you a sense of some of the challenges we face, but it means that we need to take a comprehensive approach. It means that you have to be patient, but at the same time it means that if you don't start the ball rolling in a particular direction, you'll never make any progress.
We have to develop the technology, we have to sort of have a plan. Long-term R&D effort, like President Kennedy, we're going to the moon, you know, we're gonna solve this energy problem, here's how we're gonna do it, right? We need to be realistic that we're gonna use fossil fuels now, because in the end, we are. So right now, in our 2 to 5 year plan, our focus needs to be on energy efficiency and conservation.
Government has to regulate standards of energy efficiency right across the board, from cars through appliances to homes. The more difficult part is on the supply side, where we need more renewable energies and we need to make that work with our existing fossil fuels, and we need to change our networks in order to make that happen.
What is at the other end of that transition? Where are we going? Well, where we're going, you hope, is a clean energy future where renewables are cheap and highly efficient, where dispersed power, solar, wind, can be driving communities, not just single homes, where nuclear power or natural gas or something on that scale is humming cleanly and cheaply. So that bridge needs to be strong and needs to be serious and needs to be better than what we were doing before.
So then we think about how do you move from those greenhouse gas intensive fuels toward a system that's a lower carbon economy. You have to think about the fact that the installed infrastructure for this energy system has been put in place over many, many decades. It's trillions and trillions of dollars. It takes time to turn over that infrastructure.
When you look at the enormous amount of investments that have been poured into this sector globally, those investors are telling us that they believe these technologies are the future, that they can make money, and that they are the most important business drivers in the energy sector today.
I also think a clean energy future is a future where we're using options for energy that we don't talk about yet, where we've allowed innovation and people who are driven by their own self-interest to invent new and different ways to power our economy.
If those technologies include electricity storage, then renewable energy could play even a larger part, because then you could store the electricity that comes from the wind or the sun and use it when the wind wasn't blowing and the sun isn't shining.
This is something that's achievable over the time frame of several decades. So we're talking about a goal that you might put in place by the year 2050.
But it's one that delivers payoffs much sooner than that. There are steps we take, we become somewhat less vulnerable over time. But in the end, if you want to get to a system that is not putting out carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that's not dependent on global oil markets, that is a very long time off in the future.
You know, in spite of everything, I'm optimistic. Think about 20 or 30 years ago. The world was incredibly different. The technologies were incredibly different. That will happen again. We just need to make sure that that change is directed at transitioning ourselves from a fossil fuel dependent economy to a low carbon economy, and it'll happen.
It is important to recognize that we are all joined here by a common future, and that we need to work together to make it a better situation for all of us. It certainly is within our power. It may take some initial sacrifices and patience, in other words, I mean a long-term holistic perspective, but I believe that with sound policy, supported by technology and essentially political will, we can certainly create a better future for our descendants.
Well, it was certainly thought-provoking. I just want to propose one question, and that would be, who do you hold up as an example, either internationally or even as another city in the United States, for how we should be addressing these energy issues?
Is that
well, you can each, maybe Adam.
Yeah, I've got an interesting perspective on this. I had the opportunity this past winter to spend a week in Berlin hearing about German energy policy and German climate policy and how their electricity grid is transitioning to really what we saw in that video, talking about a low carbon economy. And really, really interesting to see what Germany's been able to do. And it's an entirely different construct than what's happening here. There's consensus on climate policy, that climate change is an issue. There's consensus on nuclear policy, which is something that's, it's usually a really difficult subject to talk about in the United States, nuclear energy, because it is low carbon, but it's also, it's nuclear, so it has inherent risks. There's strong consensus in a lot of different areas, and yet, they've got power prices that are double our power prices, but yet the average home has the same electricity bill as we have here because they're just that much more efficient. So I think they're doing a lot of things right. What was interesting there is in talking with Germans that were, we were going there to learn from them, they were saying, wow, California really has it down, and they're really the model. And so, and they're convinced that at some point the United States is gonna get its act together, and just like that, we're gonna snap our fingers and we're gonna transition very rapidly, maybe not, a couple years, but in a decade or so. And so I don't know that there is anybody out there that really has this figured out. I think there's a lot of folks that are figuring it out, and we're all trying to learn from one another.
Mike?
Yeah, I actually completely agree. I think from a U.S. perspective, where everyone points to is California, right? And it's primarily because of the number of solar installations that are occurring in California. It's an exorbitant amount in comparison to the rest of the U.S. So I agree, however, with Adam that there's really, I don't think there's any one that I would point to. I think there's areas that you would point to in both cities, states, as well as particular companies that are doing some amazing things. And I think there's going to be a tipping point that you're going to hit where someone is going to figure out, the battery piece, or figure out how to get more efficiencies out of the solar panels or efficiencies out of the wind turbines. And when you start putting those things together, I feel like that's going to be the main driver to a better adoption. But I don't think at this point there's any one that I would point to. I think it's a collection or a series of successes that hopefully will start building upon one another that will get us to that point.
Any other comments about the videos?
Well, I was going to say, it was going to be kind of like a standoff. It was like this weird, arm wrestling of a pseudo-intellectual and intellectual. One of the models that I point to a lot is my old hometown of Austin, Texas. And the reason being is because it's sort of looking at this idea of creating a petri dish. I think that you kind of nailed it, which is kind of throwing everything in there and kind of seeing what comes out that's effective and that works. And I think that some of the European models that I've seen up close are glorious and amazing. But I think when you start throwing in the realistic parts of it, especially as we talk about a spread out United States, or you talk about some of these cities that are just, they are the way they are. I think Austin is sort of providing something there that's very interesting to me.
Actually, it's a great, and Green Mountain is headquartered for Texas, is in Austin, and I think I completely agree with that. I think the other great thing that Austin is doing is also focusing on water, right? So it's not just water is a current issue, don't get me wrong, but it's also looking towards how does Austin get on the forefront of things such as water, not just the energy usage, but also the other pieces that are coming up. I think that's a great example.
All right, I'd like to put in a plug for the feds. Our own Department of Energy, maybe we're not doing it here in the United States on a national level, but there is a nice roadmap that the Department of Energy has put out to how we could really very substantially decarbonize the electricity supply in this country. And the recipe is basically a third, a third, a third. So the first third is nuclear. And here in Pennsylvania, we're about 40% nuclear. So in a sense, we've got more than that third covered. The thing we have to watch out for is that those permits won't take us even to 2050. So going forward, we would have to think about permit renewals or even potentially new plant construction if we wanted to keep that third. The second third would be renewables. We heard a lot in the film about how they're intermittent and how that's an issue. There's a lot of thinking that you could actually, with adjustments to the grid that we have now, without large-scale storage, you could do a third renewable supply. Again, you have solar, which does match our peak consumption. When the sun is shining and people are running their electricity, that's when you would be getting the solar power. Wind tends to blow at night, so there can be some issues there. But still, there's a thought that you could do a third renewables with largely present technology without a miracle technological breakthrough. And then the last third, we heard a lot about natural gas. The good thing about natural gas, again, it is less carbon intensive than coal, but also I think a recognition that this is not going to get us to the level of emissions reductions that we necessarily need. You can, however, capture the carbon and not emit it to the atmosphere, but sequester it geologically. And here in Pennsylvania, we have enough geological storage for something like 600 plus years of energy consumption. So the third, again, it would be nuclear, it would be renewables, and it would be still maintaining some fossil fuels, but rather than emitting the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, sequestering it where it wouldn't have the climate change impacts.
Can I just add one thing that I think I still myself struggle with when talking about energy is it's so easy to talk about supply and talk about nuclear and wind and gas and then just forget that energy efficiency is available right now, and we could reduce our energy use by 30% just by investing in our facilities and upgrading our own infrastructure, whether it be our homes or our businesses. So energy efficiency has got a huge potential, and it's just so abstract and so difficult to kind of wrap our hands around sometimes. It's so much easier to think, well, I'll put a solar panel on it. So the job is much easier if we can just kind of learn a way to really communicate that value and get folks to really see and understand what the opportunities are in their homes and in their businesses.
And just to go ahead and give a plug, I'm going to have to give Adam $5 for setting me up for this. But there is a Rational Metal film. There are actually 22 online now. One is called Squeezing the Watt. And Squeezing the Watt is all about conservation and efficiency with an emphasis on efficiency. So, I mean, Adam's right down the right road on that.
What's the one thing each of us should do to conserve energy? So just go around the table.
To conserve energy?
Well, to save the planet.
Well, wow. Why don't we start at the other end of the table?
So I thought about this and I came up with three
good.
things,
You have the solution. Speak for all of us, please.
If you want to save the planet, you can try to personally reduce your energy use. That is not something that I have made a priority. And I don't think that that is the solution to this problem is individual action. I think we have to think this through collectively and come to a decision as to what sort of energy infrastructure we want. The second thing that you can do is that you can encourage the adoption of new technology. So I hate to shill for the guy sitting next to me, but there's, in my mind, a real difference between signing up for green electricity and encouraging the development of a new market and helping new technologies ride what we call the learning curve, where they get more adoption, and as they get adopted more, we learn by doing, and prices come down. So this is something that we've certainly seen in very dramatic fashion with solar panels. So I would actually prioritize incentivizing new technologies over personal energy conservation. And then the third thing that we can do is that we can vote. And we can vote for candidates who understand these issues and adopt rational views on them. And I think it's very important to remember that voting isn't just in the general election, voting is in the primaries too. And so we'll see a spectrum of views in the primaries. So, whatever political party you are, when you go to that primary ballot, think about how those candidates think about these issues.
So we have a mic here in the center aisle if anyone would like to ask a question of our panelists? Can you repeat it before?
Sure. The question was about tidal energy in particular. Is that pretty fair to? So it's about tidal energy, and if I could elaborate on tidal energy, tidal energy is a promising technology that's out there, but it's really, when you look at sort of the energy density, it's got to come along with a lot of other technology, especially when you look at how much energy we use here in the United States. They're using it up in the Northwest, and they've got a pretty robust program in Spain. But again, it's a nascent technology, just like pump to storage. Which, if you're not familiar with pump to storage, it's basically looking at wind power in particular. Mike usually works with wind power, where part of the power of the wind is pumping water up to a lake. And then at night, that water is released, and then it turns into hydropower. It's a pretty innovative solution. In a place like Israel, I mean, it works because, again, they don't have that intense need for energy that we have. So to me, I think that really it's piecemealing a bunch of these technologies together, and especially as they're conducive to the places where they exist, too. I mean, I would not encourage hydro storage in the New Mexico desert because there's no water there. But some of these other ones like solar are going to fit really well in that area. So I think it's just another one we need to look at and consider as we move forward into a cleaner energy future.
Could you tell me what percentage of the wind and the solar is subsidized by the federal government?
I don't know that it would be straight from the federal government. Each state really is responsible for its own state energy policy, and that's where the majority, not all of them, but the majority of the subsidies come from. So here in Pennsylvania, it's the alternative energy credit market, and that is something that we are paying for, all of us, on our utility bill. It requires utilities to buy a certain amount of wind power or a certain amount of solar, or I guess a certain mix of alternative energy and a certain percentage of solar, and that's really determined state by state. So I think one of the things that I would say, I'm going to speak for everybody here, is we'd love there to be a national policy that put everybody on the same playing field, but right now it's not at that level. It's a state by state. It's in some cases city by city, where they've got some special carve-outs, and country by country that have those programs.
I have several questions. What's the environmental impact for solar and for wind for the facilities that they take place on?
It will be in the 80 by 50 report, which is coming out soon. I can certainly say that there are environmental impacts. People do life cycle assessment studies, particularly the materials in the solar panels do have some impacts. I will say that if you look at these externalities, these costs imposed on other people, certainly the people who have done the quantification, if you believe the people doing these numbers, there's a big Extern-E project in Europe that looked at that. Nuclear and the renewables do look dramatically better than the fossil fuels.
Can I just add to that too? I think there's a big focus on energy return on energy invested. So what are you getting out of what you invested in from an energy standpoint? And I've heard the numbers for wind being fairly high. The numbers for oil are kind of diminishing, because somebody told me once, if you think about it, every oil well that's being drilled is the worst oil well that's ever been drilled, because they would, if there was a better one, they would have taken it already. And so we just have diminishing returns with every single kind of grab we have. Now, of course, technology can change that a little bit, but I think when you're thinking about the environmental impacts, it has to be, when they first drilled an oil well in Pennsylvania, it was a Drake oil well, the first commercial oil well, they got 80 gallons to the gallon of oil. And I've heard the shale play that's up in Canada and Alberta, they're down to about 4 gallons per gallon, 5 gallons per gallon. That's a big difference. And so it has kind of, those numbers are ever changing as technology changes and as kind of the world turns.
Why has there been so much interest, particularly on carbon dioxide rather than SOx and NOx in the particulate matter from coal-fired plants?
Boy, coal-fired plants kill a lot of people, something like 5,000 people a year. They're not identifiable, though. You know, we don't know if somebody gets lung cancer or even acute cardiopulmonary issues. We don't link it back, so we don't know. We can say statistically that there are 5,000 people, but we don't have names attached to those. That's a statistical estimate, so I think that's a lot of it. The other thing is just that the carbon dioxide is a legacy for future generations. So the particulates are a huge problem and something that I wish people were a little bit more aware of. But they are shorter lived, at least. So it's more something we're doing to ourselves and not something we're doing to future generations.
Excuse me, there's a line behind you, so I'm going to ask that we, thank you.
You know, and also for the gentleman that just asked all those awesome questions. You know, there's a paper that the CDC did on coal-fired plants and their effect on people's health. So it's just phenomenal. It's scary, but it's phenomenal.
So my question is directed towards Adam, taking it back to the energy efficiency and kind of back to a city level here in Philadelphia. You mentioned lighting the clock through LED lighting, but what do you see as the biggest thing standing in your way, or the challenges standing in your way from, you know, taking that to a grander scale of LED street lighting or parking garages to save even more money?
Well, I think at a city scale, Philadelphia has done a lot of work, and I think the biggest policy we have right now that is really in our favor is a policy that a lot of folks might not be familiar with. There's a requirement that all buildings over 50,000 square feet have to do energy benchmarking, so they have to basically get a rating for their building, and they get a rating from 0 to 100. If it's a very efficient building, it gets near 100. If it's a very inefficient building, it gets near 0. And then they have to publicly disclose that rating. And we've figured out that the top 2,000 buildings here in the city are about 15% of our greenhouse gases. So from a city standpoint, you know, we've got over 600,000 homes here. 600,000 homes, and the residential sector is maybe 30% of our greenhouse gas impact. And then 2,000 buildings, just 2,000 buildings is 15%. So focusing on those big buildings, those big industries, and trying to find schemes that work for them is crucially important. We need to have every one of those buildings be in top shape, because if it's not, it's really wasting those opportunities. Now, there's other things that the city can do. Certainly, we can put in LED lighting. We can do our own energy efficiency in our facilities, and we're working on doing that. But at that next level, the best place that I see us having impact is in those 2,000 buildings and trying to impact that 15%. And it's just a numbers thing. We've got to go where the opportunity is, and that's a huge opportunity.
Cool. I want to thank you all for coming to begin with. Kind of a question related to Pennsylvania and fracking. Can you all talk a little bit more about what Pennsylvania has done well with fracking and natural gas compared to maybe like a state like New York State, and the possibility, I even heard a radio commentator recently saying Philadelphia might become the major port in the entire country with a pipeline coming into Philadelphia to export oil as well, or natural gas. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh boy. So yeah, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Obviously, New York has said we don't want any part of it. Pennsylvania has said we're willing to develop it, and it has resulted certainly in jobs and lower home heating prices that I've enjoyed, and probably a lot of us have enjoyed. I'm just going to relate a little bit the experience that I had going to the Society for Risk Analysis meeting last December when fracking was very high on the agenda, and there was a lot of talk about it. And it is just very decentralized. There's not a single national policy towards how this should be regulated. And what came up a lot was people saying, Maryland is doing a good job at this. And I was like, why aren't people saying Pennsylvania is doing a great job at this? So, you know, if we're not going to go the New York route and ban it, could we go the Maryland route and have people sit down and say what's a really good way to determine what the best practices are and institutionalize those best practices so that if we are going to do this, we're doing it in an intelligent manner. So again, that's hearsay, but nobody was saying Pennsylvania is the role model. People were saying Maryland's the role model.
And I'll add to that just and take a stab at the Energy Hub question, which is really dangerous for me. But I think the frustrating part for me, and I've had the opportunity to sit in on city council's hearings on this subject, and I've been to some other sessions on this subject, and there really isn't a middle discussion. There's folks that are all for it, and there's folks that are completely against it, and the conversation has not gone into, well, what could be the benefits from such a program? Because we do have a huge need for jobs here in this city. But we also have a huge issue with air quality, and we also have a huge issue with wanting to reduce our greenhouse gases. So we have to get to that point where there's actually a conversation on the risks, rewards, benefits. Right now, that conversation does not exist in that conversation, and I'm really worried that it's going to be a very difficult path for us unless we can find that middle ground. So.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you all about solar and incentivizing the use of it at the consumer level. I've heard of $0 leases, and I guess particularly for Adam, if he can speak to this, you mentioned 600,000 homes in the city, and I guess also city buildings, the ability to sell back electricity that's sharing. So I just wanted to ask if there are any other, if there are useful ideas, or if there are any other ideas regarding incentivizing the consumer toward the use of solar energy.
And what's your name? Your name?
Ted Baker.
Ted is the first one where I can determine a Philadelphia accent. And I mean, I'm loving that. That's awesome. Yeah, there you go. It's like my own little personal version of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's awesome. Thank you, Ted.
So, Ted, I'll start, and I think it goes back to what Adam had mentioned a little while back in terms of the state-by-state incentives that are out there. That really applies to the residential solar customer as well, right? So, residential solar array is expensive for a lot of folks, right? So really where it makes sense are markets, and unfortunately Pennsylvania is not one of those markets right now that it totally makes sense in. Markets such as Massachusetts, New Jersey, we've already talked about California, but markets where there are incentives for the customer that actually make that payback, somewhere in the neighborhood of, in the case of Massachusetts, about the 4 to 5 year range, up to about 6 or 7 year range. It makes sense depending upon what the actual cost per kilowatt hour the customer would be paying through default service. So that, I think, is the big outstanding item. I think to Adam's point earlier, there's not really a true national policy on it. It's more state by state. So depending on what the state policy is, that's where the incentives lie. And a lot of those incentives are actually expiring, here in the next year or next 2 years. And so the question really becomes, what does the solar industry look like from a residential perspective at the point that those incentives dry up or those incentives are not renewed? So there are companies out there today doing leasing, for instance, that help make it more affordable to a lot of customers. But I think the biggest challenge from a residential solar perspective is, regardless of leasing or purchasing, leasing's a 20-year commitment in many cases, right? It's a big commitment for a lot of people to put solar panels on their roof when they typically think about their energy usage for about 6 minutes a year. So to get them to think about putting a solar array, they either have to be someone who firmly believes in renewable energy or firmly believes that there's going to be a payback for them, so it makes economic sense for them. So I think the biggest challenge is there's a big group in between, right? There's a big group of people that just don't look at that as being an investment that they're willing to make or a commitment that they're willing to make. A 20-year commitment is longer than most people make in any area of their lives, never mind, you know, solar panels on the roof of their home. So I think that for me is kind of the big outstanding challenge. In terms of real quick, I'll just answer on the selling back to the utility. Again, that depends unfortunately on market. So there's net metering, which is, net metering is the ability to basically take the usage or take your, what you're generating, use what you're generating, and then whatever excess there is, it actually sends back. So unfortunately, that also varies by market. Unfortunately, you know, a lot of the answers I think in this scenario is that there is not a standard policy across the board, right? It varies by, even within PJM, which is our grid operator here in the Pennsylvania region. It's different whether you're in New Jersey or whether you're in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, it's different whether you're in PECO or you're in PPL. So, you know, I think coming up with a common policy would actually help answer a lot of these questions and at least get people thinking a little bit more about it, because at least then it would make sense to more folks.
Well, I think that's a great question, and for the city, it comes down to, you know, a couple things. What is our role as a city? And we can do a couple different things. We can make a policy that maybe fits for a certain sector of those buildings and a certain, you know, threshold under which you know, buildings would have to kind of meet. Now, we have not done that, and I don't think there's really been anybody that's gone out and said, you've got to get at least a 25 for your Energy Star score. You know, that's not a conversation that's been had, but it is. There have been conversations. There have been laws in New York City, for example, that require retro commissioning or require certain lighting retrofits or certain metering rules, and I think those could kind of come into play. I should clarify on a lot of this. I'm talking a lot about my opinions, not necessarily the city opinion, and also. As the energy manager, I'm not a...
And by the way, this will be the last time you see Adam up here as the Philadelphia city manager.
The good news is it's all being recorded.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, on video.
City council makes those laws, so we are kind of we are empowered to basically to implement those laws, and we can certainly kind of try to influence how they are enacted and how they're run, But I think the bigger opportunity with disclosure of energy scores is getting that information out to the marketplace. And so if I'm a energy service company or I'm a consultant that is focused on buildings and I see that the hotel that we're in right now has a score of 5, and the building manager is going to be getting some phone calls. There's going to be some people that are going to be saying, hey, there's ways for you to save money. There's opportunities here. There's no reason you should be getting a 5 on that facility. So I think that's really what we're trying to do is change the market as opposed to enforce people to really go out there and mandatorily retrofit their building, because each building is different and each building's going to have its own unique way of how it can or cannot save energy. You know, I've got the fortunate ability to work on City Hall, and that's a very different facility than many of the other than the Comcast Center. So to put those and say they've got to meet some certain guidelines that's a tough thing for the city to sort of mandate, and I don't think that's a road that we would go down.
We're trying to get our residents to keep the energy down. That's the big battle.
We're running short on time, so I'm going to ask the people with the remaining questions to ask your question, and then you'll have an opportunity to answer all of the questions at once.
It's like a lightning round. I love it. That's awesome.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One is, and they're both based on information that I got from my son, who has spent at least 30 years in energy conversion and delivery. One is, he said that there was a European country that was doing research on using vortex instead of the propellers in wind conversion, or wind energy generation. I'd like to know if you know anything about that. The third is sort of one of So they can make actually, and they've got so much they can make the energy prices go up and down, right? And when they do that, and the Americans have to fire people because they don't have enough money to support their employees, these employees then go and work in the Middle East. Therefore, and the bottom line is when the energy changes from fossil fuels to other forms, who's going to be ahead? Because they've done so much research, because they have the money to do it. It's going to be the Middle East again. So I'd like to know your thoughts on those two.
Well, I would say the first part sounds delightfully like a Joss Whedon movie. I don't know a lot about the Vortex stuff, but it sounds cool, and I'll certainly look into it. I would say the second part is, I don't know a lot about the economics of the way things work in the United States in the oil fields, but I would tell you that we've certainly seen fluctuations in employment numbers with oil field workers. I don't know. I've never heard that they're going over to the Middle East to work, which is something else I'd like to maybe look into at some point. But the interesting thing about the United States right now is that we are really kind of at the tip of the spear when it comes to energy innovation on pretty much every level, and hopefully we're moving towards being like an energy leader again in a major way. And I don't mean energy leader just in the fossil fuels, but also in renewable technologies and the way that it's implemented. So, I'm fairly optimistic about what at least I get to see from my travels. I don't know if you have something else to add to that, Mike.
Yeah, I will just go to the second portion of the question. I'm also not familiar with the Vortex piece, but I'll also look at it. But from a kind of jobs perspective and kind of where we are in terms of the energy space, I feel like we are at the tip of the spear in terms of the renewable side of the business. I think, quite honestly, there's a lot of conversations around, hey, when this shift happens, what does that mean from an economy perspective? And I think the reality is each of the types of energy generation that we're talking about requires new jobs, right? And if you look at the markets that we're talking about and where it's successful, there are a lot of new jobs being created in these spaces. They're different, obviously, than the jobs that had been in this industry before, but if you look at some of the different markets, even looking at Western PA, where you have some of the wind farms that are there and some of the solar arrays that are going out, these are jobs that are being created in those markets based off of the demand that's being created by the customers, whether they're residential or commercial.
Yeah.
Very interesting discussion. I better make this lower. I live a half block from here in Center City 1, which is a big condo, early 70s built, and we've just established a green committee, but we really don't know how to interact with the municipalities. I'm looking at Adam for that, because I think we could benefit a lot, for example, from knowledge of what is coming up in terms of possible requirements, or whether there are also ever incentives offered. For example, we need to redo our roof, and this would be a moment where we should think about the green implications for doing that. And I think there are a lot of other issues that we could work on, and we don't know who in the municipality actually to work with on that. So I was pleased to see you on the panel. So if I could maybe afterwards get the information.
You can definitely contact me afterwards. And again, most of my work is focused internally, but we have resources and folks that we can kind of direct you to help you out with making those decisions. It's always a challenge. And again, the city has a number of, you guys, as everybody I'm sure knows, the city has a number of very big issues. We've got a lot of funding problems. We've got schools that need investment. And so, we do have limited resources ourselves with which to help folks kind of in these areas, but we'll do everything we can to make sure you've got some guidance.
One more question.
Good evening, thank you. Mike, since you mentioned this, I've been in Philadelphia for 33 years now, but I grew up in Great Falls, Montana. People still Which leads to my question. One of you, I think it was you, sir, mentioned water. Water has not really been discussed much here, though. And it's a very important issue, especially for those of us who grew up in or reside in the western part of this country. And I mentioned California with respect to the German case as very proactive, which they are, but they don't have water. From where does the water come? Now, I grew up in Great Falls, Montana, which has 5 waterfalls discovered by Lewis and Clark, 3 of which are dammed. It was founded Montana Power, which was a huge energy producer and remains so to this day. But when the water's down, the power also drops. Now, I was just in Denver in February for my aunt's funeral, and I noticed that, you know, in February it was 70 degrees in Manitou Springs. There was no snow in the mountains. So without ample snowfall in the Rockies and in the Sierra Madres, from where are we going to get the water for hydropower, for drinking, bathing, etc.? From where does that come? And please address the issue of water. I think it's highly crucial. Thank you very much.
So I can give you an answer as far as bathing and drinking, but I'm not sure you're going to like it. When you talk to people about what's the one stream of water that grows over time, they say effluent. So certainly water reclamation and water reuse is one thing that I think is starting to happen increasingly. That and desalination. There's a big desalination plant that's coming on for San Diego. So I think as we look at water options in the future, again, we've got the Delaware here, so we're pretty good. But it's surprising that the Schuylkill is actually approaching water-stressed conditions. I was surprised to learn that. When we look at urban water supply, I think we are looking at a lot of maybe more intentional reuse and desalination. But the agriculture question is a huge one. Because simply put, the urban residents can afford to pay for the desalination. We are not used to paying that much for food to have actually desalinated water. So it might involve, you know, very different changes to how we grow our food supply.
If I can just add to that, I think it's one of the issues that Philadelphia is actually fairly blessed in its water abundance. And it's something that our kind of leadership has talked about a little bit as the city, as we kind of move forward. Do we start to see places like Phoenix and Atlanta and Denver and some of these other cities that are really struggling with water supply? Do we start to see climate refugees? They're not going to be called that, but do people start to migrate because of these issues? And should we, as a city that has some of these assets and as a city that's built for 2 million, you know, what are those implications for us as a municipality? Part of that also goes down to kind of the city planning aspect of, you know, where do we want people to be, or maybe not city planning, but planning in general. And do we have kind of compact spaces so we don't have to build out water infrastructure to kind of further distances, or are we are kind of more in a compact area? And I think it's a huge advantage that Philadelphia has. We're both, from a climate standpoint, we're going to see hotter and wetter weather, but we're not on the coast, and we've got a fair amount of water available. And if you look at, you know, the next 10 or 20 cities that are on the list in terms of population, there's not that many that can say those two things, that they're not vulnerable to as vulnerable. We still are vulnerable, but not as vulnerable to big storms, and that we'll have water. It's scary to think that that's the terms that we're working under, but it's a huge advantage for Philadelphia.
We'll take your question if it's very brief.
I just want to preface the fact that I practiced environmental law in Philadelphia for about 35 years, always representing poor communities who were being adversely affected in health and death and everything. Is it legitimate for anybody to seek office who claims that he knows nothing about the question of environmental or global energy? almost every candidate that the Republicans have put up said, I don't know anything about the subject. Well, shouldn't they be automatically thrown off of this possible election? Second, in order for the electorate, the people, to vote logically, they have to be educated. Why is it that these very people who say they know nothing are the people who say we can't afford anything for education? Therefore, this whole subject really boils down to how are we going to get an educated society who understands these issues and are not going to be flabbergasted by politicians who are there only to get money and by donees who are there only to get elected people who are going to serve their interests. And that is the problem that you gentlemen and we in the audience have to deal with. All the others are subsets of that. Without education of elected officials and the electorate, we can't make all the kinds of improvements that you guys are talking about. Thank you.
That was like Philadelphia's Atticus Finch. I love this. I'm having the best time. Give him another hand. That was that great. There you go.
Patrick, you're the educator.
I thought you kind of said it all, but one thing that I will say is when you do studies and social scientists look at are the people who are not on board with acting on the climate system, are they necessarily worse informed than people who favor action? And unfortunately, the response is no. So I think that part of the issue is opinion leadership. So I want to draw attention to some work that Dina Gourmet has done. She's over at a competing institution down the street, Wharton, looking at how labeling affects consumer choices. And when you label certain things as energy efficient or energy independent, everybody gets behind them. But when you label certain things as green, the Democrats are okay with it and the Republicans don't like it. So that's a sign that, again, it's not necessarily knowledge per se. I think it's that we've divided up into different teams. And there's one team and there's another team, and if you're on one team, you bone up on facts that present things a certain way. And if you're on the other team, you look at things maybe a little more rationally. But this sort of comes back to my point about primary voting being really important, because we don't want one political party that doesn't have anybody who's got plugged into reality on this issue. And again, it's a reason to have more, I think, discussions like this and try to bring people together, because when you have people, one thing that the social scientists tell us is when you have people in like-minded groups, they get more and more polarized. When you bring people together and start them talking to each other, then they start to compromise and see things more alike.
Well, we couldn't have ended on a better note. So.
Well, and let me give a postscript then, because I'm in total agreement, and I do want to address what you said in terms of what the Rational is trying to do. I mean, I agree with you that there are a lot of uneducated people out there, but again, our numbers are proving, 3.2 million people have seen Rational films, and I would love to think that my films are as good as the ones where the kittens play the piano on YouTube. But they're not. I mean, these are pretty deep films. They're pretty deep thinking films. And I have hope that, especially when you look at the people in this room, especially when you look at the kids in this room, that the future is sort of coalescing and creating its own momentum right now in that rational middle. And I do believe that at the end of the day, and it goes right back to what's been said at this table many times, is that people ask, well, what can I do to create the energy future? And sure, you can take one of those little twisty light bulbs and put it in, but really there are big levers to pull, and it's when we all sort of vote with our minds and our opinions and with our educations, and we think deeply about what policy needs to be and creating a holistic national energy policy, which is something that we don't have. These are things that are all sort of boiling to the top, and it's something that really enables us the power and the influence to create that energy future. So thank you so much to the World Affairs Council. Thank you so much to the panel, and thank you so much to you guys, because this was awesome.
And thank you. Thank you, Greg, Adam, Mike, Patrick, and thank all of you for coming out tonight.